program, we're going to cover classic submissions from combat Aikido. Joey? As we've said, that the Ikkyo, or first control technique, is the jab of Aikido. It's the first thing you should approach your opponent with. Basically, coming from one side, one hand over the other, as if holding a sword. Your intent is to clear with the top hand and to strike with the bottom hand, like so. When you take your Ikkyo, to keep this point of contact just above the elbow is most important, because without this hand, I can control his balance just by pushing his arm into his head or into his ear. If I try to take like this and his elbow has leeway to move, I'm going to lose the power, and he'll be able to push me over, or he'll be able to get his arm out. So first, to take Ikkyo to the ground and into the first submission, first basic submission. So. Another angle. We're going to very slowly exaggerate the move so that you can see the subtlety in which you're going to apply the submission. It's very important to do the job with both arms a specific way, or you won't achieve submission. So then, this hand cutting into the floor, this hand as if I'm drawing a knife across my own chest, and then twisting the torso. Sometimes this hand reaching and grasp the opponent's hand as a handle. Next is first control into submission with neck crank. In this position, this is secure. To finish a submission, or to bring into submission, more lethal submission, I'm going to use my hand as a crossface. I'm going to go across my opponent's nose, across the bridge, to secure his neck sideways. Once it's secured sideways, I'm going to lean the head back, so to touch his ear to his back. An impossible move. If more power is needed, now we're going to add more power to our neck crank by using a conventional wrestling sit-out. So from the first control to the neck crank, we're going to go into traditional wrestling sit-out. So then, once more. In all submission, head control is most important, vitally important. It's the easiest way to control someone regardless of their power. Because regardless of how strong they make their body, their neck can only get so strong. And it's easy to manipulate the head and neck with just the hands or the force of the legs. We're going to use a neck crank with our legs, and we're going to do it from a traditional entering throw. So then, once more slowly. In this position, I'm going to cross-face him with my shin. I'm going to rub his shin across and turn his head and plant my knee into the ground first. This will roll his body to his side. Then pinch his head squarely between my legs, posting through onto the mat, come up on one foot and twist my hips. In logical succession, we're going to add, from each move, we're planning as if the first move doesn't work, and then into the second move, and then into the third move. So we're going to go from the neck crank with the head into the first successive arm lock. In order for transition to be smooth, it's important that much of your pivoting is done only on the knee or on the balls of the feet, and try to eliminate any other part of the body touching the mat. In this position, I want to make my transition in one shot so that this leg coming around should not touch the mat, or I should not lean my weight on the mat. I should go from this position into the arm bar in one felled swoop. So from here to there, like this. Another common transitional arm lock is a simple chicken wing behind the back. Sometimes more useful because I don't deprive myself of the kneeling position, which is more stable and easier to recover from. Here is chicken wing. From chicken wing, once more. Continuing on, we're going to go to udegarami, or a coiled arm lock. We're going to do it also from a traditional entering throw, and then later we'll discuss various applications of entering throw to do ikkyo from various situations, so that you're not always performing the same technique to down your opponent. But for now, we'll use standard ikkyo entering throw. When you're performing this type of arm lock, sometimes the thumb will get in your way, and if you feel that it's inhibiting your ability to perform the grip, simply put the thumb on the top, and like so. Okay. For your mat work, it's important to master a technique called shiko, or knee walking. Knee walking involves moving across the mat with your heels directly under your buttocks, so that your movement is very efficient. And to stabilize an opponent, you're always walking your knees into the opponent. So you can kind of lock him between the mat and yourself. Very little leeway so that there's no room for escape. This position is a little bit of space. Now, because of this, he's very tight, and when he's trying to move or roll into me, he's rolling up onto my knee. This helps me to lock him in. But if I make this much space, he has room to move back and forth, and it's not as good for control. This is good for control. Also, when I'm holding him in this type of a position, my knees are pinched out, so now he's stretched into control. And for this type of submission, I'm walking my knees under him. So if he were to try to roll into me, the first thing he would run into are my knees, and that would prevent him from rolling. But if he has space, easy for him to roll. We're going to do a variation for taking our opponent to the mat. Not because any one variation is insufficient, but you want to have varied options so you're not repeating yourself. The more you repeat yourself, the more your opponent will be able to key into what you're doing and block it and keep you out. Right now we're going to go and do cup and saucer again. Please try to study the path of cup and saucer, that it doesn't end once the opponent is on the mat, but you are able to continually guide your opponent and manipulate him until you flattened him out. So the original maneuver for cup and saucer is that you're taking your opponent's neck and then guiding his entire spine like this, and this form can go on technically forever, but you'll see when you get your opponent in a position that's favorable, you stop it and flatten him out. Okay. When you're performing this to learn it at a slow speed, it's harder or more difficult because you need contact, you need conductivity, you need his resistance to keep the pressure between the two of you. When you see the randori, it will look a lot more abrupt, but it will also be a little bit more fluid because of that contact. But when you slow it down, you tend to have spaces, and those spaces make it a little bit less real. Basically, I'm going to from this position, hook into his neck. Once I hook into his neck, I'm going to take his head in a path like this. By the time my hand comes back around into this position, I've almost got him in a crossface with the back of my hand, and to lead him. If you'll notice, the contact is constant, and sometimes with this part of the hand, sometimes with this part, but regardless, I keep that motion fluid and I keep the contact against him. Okay. We're going to follow it up with neck crank submission. We're going to use a traditional wrestling sit-out because it's very powerful. We're not going to deprive ourselves of any position because he should already be in a submitted position. Now, just to give you a slightly different angle, because of the nature of the technique, there are points where it's hard to see just exactly what I'm doing. But if you keep in mind that I'm basically repeating the same cycle of cup and saucer from when we start sitting up, and then when my opponent is flattened out on the ground, I'm continuing the same process, like this and like this. Technically, you could go on forever with this same maneuver, spinning your opponent like a top. But in reality, it's not going to happen but more than once. once again, a situation you have to address. Even though you're practicing the traditional form of Aikido, if you're going to use it competitively, you're going to have to deal with certain realities, one of which is a guard position. If you've seen this happen in real fighting, you'll know what to expect. We're just going to give you a basic scenario, and we're going to use contemporary submissions with the basic Kihon or basic Ikkyo to get out. So from the guard position, it's very important is that when you're in the guard, your opponent is going to try to bring you down to his level. He's going to clinch you with his legs and pull you in and deprive you of this posture, which is the most powerful for us to work from. You'll be starting in something like this, and I'm going to show you just a basic way to straighten yourself out first to begin. So then, just to achieve this position, now I'm very stable. Now I'm going to go into guard pass, both hands simultaneously through the legs and break the feet. Passing the leg over, just like as in Ikkyo, the leg now becomes the arm for Ikkyo. Again, walking in and controlling his body. Now that my knees are into him and under him, it's very hard for him to roll in and around. From this point, often we pass to take Ikkyo on the top, but when we do, our opponent tries to catch guard because it's very important for him to keep guard. That's his control for the ground. From this position, I'm going to relinquish this into this. Traditionally, when you do a knee bar, you want to use your armpit to take the position, but we'll show you something in a second. To separate this and pass this under my armpit, keeping a bit of pressure on my knees when I arch back is enough pressure. Be very careful when practicing this because the tendons in the knees are very tender and they tear, and once they tear, it's very, very tragic. In this position, okay. He's catching a guard position. First, stretch the leg so that it's straight. Next, pass the armpit and buck the hips. Catch guard. Catch guard. Pass over, catch guard. First, stable posture. Second, both hands pass through, one through the groin region and the other through the ankles. Then make space to break the guard. Passing the guard across, just like as in Ikkyo. Taking this cross hand for an Ikkyo, as I pass, opponent will try to catch guard. From here, usually the opponent will pull his heels in to be defensive. Simply break them apart, stretch it out. When you have it stretched, don't try to put the submission on from here with the hands. It's too much power for the arms. You want to use your body's power. So, I'm going to pass it into my armpit, like this, then like this. Now, simply by using my hips, buck my hips forward. Very easy to make power. Also, if something should happen and your opponent is able to bend the leg, you still have toe hold in this position. When you take toe hold in this position, most of the power is derived from the wrists, like this. The next is the focus of the foot, which is either to aim the heel into his buttocks or to pull the toe hold up behind you so as to create a very tight angle and stretch this area. Okay. One more. Sometimes when you're trying for the knee bar, your opponent may in defense sit up and try to wrestle with the feet, bending his legs and pulling them in. In this case, he's going to try to pull this out. So when he does, I'm going to catch his other leg as though I'm doing an Achilles hold. All that's necessary here is that I keep this leg and I'm trapping both. If you can do this the right way, all you need to do is pass this up past his knee. Now I have figure 4 knee bar on this leg. So in his attempt to defend against this knee bar, he's given up this one as a knee bar. This looked like a pro wrestling move, but this is how it's actually applied. I'm simply going to kick this leg straight with this leg against this leg. Figure 4 leg lock. Very powerful. Good posture. Pass. In this position, I'm passing for knee bar, but my opponent now sit up to fight it and try to take it out. When he does, to save this leg, I'm going to take this leg as an Achilles hold. I'm simply going to force this foot past his knee. Now, by kicking this leg straight and against this leg, I have a figure 4 knee bar. The worst possible position for any fighter is on their back. No matter how skilled you are, to be on your back and to have to fight off the ground up into your opponent is the worst disadvantage. So rather than dwell in submission from our back, I'm going to show you something basic that will help you to escape and or apply a submission with not a lot of work. Most common submissions done from the back are usually arm bar or leg choke. But with experienced fighters, they're more apt to get out, they're more apt to strip it out because as they feel it coming on, they know what to do to block it. So we're going to teach a hammerlock pin today. It's not as common that you're going to be able to submit a person, but you'll be able to get yourself out from being on the bottom. Okay, so this being typically what you're dealing with, you're in a guard position and you're going to work for a submission to make him work to get out of it. And at that point, you're going to take the hammerlock pin, which is basically like an Aikido, but it's done with your legs. You're going to take your opponent forward and plant him flat. Okay, from here, I'm going to go for a typical arm bar, which is hooking his leg like this, turning your hand around, and throwing your leg over his head like this. I have this arm. He's aware of this. He's got to strip this arm out. When he strips this arm out, I'm going to cut down with this leg to put him into the mat and hold him flat. At this point, this is readily available. Taking it straight up. Okay. Okay. Once again, twisting this hand inside helps to turn the body. If I just shoot it inside like this, or if I try to grab the pants, I don't have a lot of leverage and I'll run out of room soon. So when I shoot it through, I'm going through the leg with the intention of coming out on the back of the thigh with my arm turned all the way around like this. Usually start like this, and as you go through the hole, corkscrew your hand backwards and around. Like this, and like this. He's stripping this, I'm pinning him with this. Reaching up. And when you take the toe hold, bring it straight up to the buttocks if you can, or aim it there. He may stop you here, but the focal point is here. Hammerlock pin to toe hold submission is for when you're flat, but if you keep the hammerlock pin and sit up into the technique, you'll have a full-blown hammerlock, which is a submission, plus you can add neck crank and various other things. So the same vantage starting is starting to take the arm bar. He's stripping it out. I'm pinning him flat. From here, if I decide not to take the toe hold, but I want to sit up and fully control, this will be a chicken wing or arm lock behind the back, sufficient to make him tap. But upon this position, I'm going to reach for crossface. You could take his head either side. Very powerful. Let's do this once normal speed. The purpose of this next technique is it's a submissive technique. It's used for throwing and controlling, but we're going to use it as a practice to steer the opponent on the mat. To steer the opponent, we're going to go basically from one form of the wrist lock to its opposite form, just twisting the wrist over and over. The traditional form we learn like this, from a grab and catch. You can do in front of the opponent just to take the wrist, stretch it one way, and on his resistance back, he's going to try to pull it away. You're going to go into that resistance and put the wrist lock on. The wrist lock is not done to put him down with pain. It should be done to a very far away dead angle and with the same intensity as cutting with a sword, which is it's like this, and to cut, you want to cut far away into the mat. His dead zone is over there somewhere. If I do this, it's painful, but if I do it out there, I'll take his balance from him, and that's the idea. You can take the wrist lock from in front, just like this, or you can do it with an enter and turn maneuver, like this. This is, from this move, I'm leading him this way, and he wants to resist to pull it back so that he can take his wrist back to himself. When he does, I'm going to turn into it. Now the purpose of this drill as a control is now I have him from the wrist control, and he's going to try to spin his body to get out. When he does, I'm going to simply keep the pressure on the wrist. He's got to spin in the direction that releases. Okay. Basically, we're going to practice controlling the opponent as almost like you would have a dog on a leash. I want to keep his arm away from him so that from a distance, just by putting pressure into him, I can keep him so that I can steer him around, but he's going to be flat on his back at the time. Here he's down. If I roll him over and turn his hand like this, this is a sufficient lock. If he's able to spin and get out, go ahead, Joey, spin and get out. I'm just steering him into the mat. Every time that I lose the grip to keep control of him, I turn back into this technique. This flattens him out, and now he's got to move. Go ahead, Joey, move and get out. Sufficient. It shouldn't be done because of pain. It hurts if you're not used to it, but all it really is doing is it's steering his balance or his ability to regain himself. So I'm usually going from this wrist lock to this wrist lock, but I don't have to switch my hand grip. The rotation of his arm and his resistance to get out should handle it for me. grip is very important. Fundamentally, you don't want to grip too strong. Too strong can actually make the ability of the opponent to pull away easier. So what you want is a grip that sticks to your opponent softly. So I'm going to turn my hand upside down and take his grip like this, and then when I turn it back for the wrist lock, I'm going to overlap my thumbs or near each other, but basically my thumbs on one side of the hand, my fingers overlapping on the other side, and always when I cut, I want to cut far away. So in this case, if I cut into him, he has power to push his arm out, but if I cut far away, like this, take his balance from him, and keeping this grip, not concerned with trying to turn the grip around and re-catch it, but keeping this grip, I'm just going to apply pressure until he will reverse the grip by his body movement. So once I attain this position, I won't lose it just by, he'll try to get out and switch the grip around like this. Two principal techniques that go hand in hand in Aikido is four directions throw and third control. I'm going to explain the grip and the lock for each and then show them as transitional techniques. Traditionally, when you learn them as a one-time technique. In other words, you step in for the technique, it happens, and it's done. But in reality, oftentimes you're being blocked out. So you'll step in for a technique, and if it doesn't work, you're left with no recourse. In this training, you're learning that the recourse for one technique is simply the opposite version. So third control is this grip, like holding a sword for the cut, and like this. And to enter in for third control and for four directions throw, you want to pass under your opponent's armpit. Now, you can learn the basic grip from in front of your opponent. By that I mean, I can, from here, take this grip, turn it around, apply the grip. This is a third control grip, but you never get it this way. But this is a way to learn the application of this grip. Fourth control, or four directions throw grip, is the same grip, but done with the opposite spiral of the arm. So now I'm taking the arm this way, using this hand, just like we did for third control, but I'm doing it to the outside on the thumb. To throw this way, it's very effective. To actually get this maneuver off, you have to pass under the armpit in a turn of at least 180 degrees. It can be done standing or sitting, and most effectively it's done standing, but when you do it, you're going to run into a problem, particularly with opponents who have greater power than you. So I'm going to enter in now with just third control. This is under the armpit, third control. Okay. Now I'm going to enter in fourth control, same arm. The difference between the two techniques is simply the direction which you enter and the lock that you wind up with at the end. In a four directions throw, I'm cutting across the body this way. I'm picking his elbow up with my elbow so that I can pass under. From this position, I'm going to pass his arm across my shoulder. When I get to my head, I'm going to have to very subtly pass my head under and his arm over in one move. And come out the other side. Now he's propped up on my arm, and I have it in one hand in a grip. To take him from this position to the floor, I'm just going to, like a sword, cut straight down. Very effective. Now, these are the basic versions of these techniques, but to get them off in real combat, you're going to have to practice them like this. I'm taking his hand, and I want him to give me power either way. So if he feels me entering in for third control, he's got to block it out. At this point, I want to ride the resistance. Right now, I'm holding him at his resistance. He feels that if he loosens, I'm going to go that way for third control. I'm going to coil him this way, and on his resistance, recoil him and go the opposite way. So that way there, it's actually his power that puts me into fourth control. So I'm winding him this way, and remember that when you apply these techniques, your tendons and your ligaments and your muscles spiral around. They're not linear, they spiral. So that in everything that you do, when you take a grip, you never just grab. You always grab with a turn. Grab with a turn. Grabbing with a turn. Grabbing with a turn. And you're planning that your first grasp will meet with resistance. So that I know that if I grab with a turn this way, already he's resisting this way. So that if I let him resist all the way, go ahead, turn your wrist, turn your wrist, turn your wrist. He's slipping through my hands. This is a catch style. I'm going to turn him, and he's going to resist. And when he does, watch what I do. I'll let his wrist slip for about 2 inches. So I'm turning, he's turning back. If you see his wrist is turning and slipping, as soon as I let it slip and I re-catch, I reverse the direction. Now, I'm turning, slip, re-catch. Very powerful, very subtle, because it's from a distance it looks like I'm just overpowering him. But watching again, I'm turning, he's resisting. Slip one turn, return. Very powerful. Okay, for the drill, first we're going to do enter third control, re-enter four directions throw. So I'm coming in for third control, and I'm going to pass under the armpit, and he's going to block me out. Very powerful, reverse direction. Okay. Likewise, I'm going to enter in for four directions throw, blocked out. This concludes classic submissions. I hope that many of you who are serious traditional students won't feel dismayed that we've deviated from the traditional course. Indeed, all of these techniques are necessary, especially the more subtle things such as the catch and recatch, and these are things that you'll need to practice daily in order to be fluent in a dynamic situation. With something like Aikido, it's not a specific technique. Aiki is simply riding your opponent's force. And so you could do Aikido with boxing. In fact, if you ask me, Roy Jones is as good an Aikido practitioner as any Aikido master. Most techniques are absorbed from a weapon. Judo is Aikido. Most techniques are based or taken from the sword or the spear. Tennis is Aikido. Aikido means that I'm harmonizing with you. Basically, I'm trying to solicit a response from you, and when I get that response, I'm going to steer that response into a favorable position. And that's Aiki. It's not the particular technique, it's what you're doing with the opponent's energy.
How did you first get interested in the martial arts?
I first got interested in martial arts when I was a very small boy. I actually remember hearing on TV about the death of Bruce Lee, and I must have been 3 or 4, and somehow that struck me, that stuck with me. And then anytime I ever saw anything related to martial arts, it was just one of those things born in you. When I was a kid, and when I was in my early 20s, I think like a lot of people, I was astounded by the speed of Bruce Lee. If you catch the right footage, you can see a human being that could literally move faster than the eye could see. So that was a phenomenon, and I think a lot of us were chasing that phenomenon. And as time went on, I started to see other things, and I started to see things differently. And you know, all the time you're trying to simplify what you do and quantify it, and that's really what gravitated me towards the Aikido as a martial art, because the cue and the structure of the cue is very simple and easier to assimilate into your structure. If you can't immerse yourself to a degree in it, it's not worth it even to participate. I mean, if you're looking at it to look and say, wow, that's really cool and I like watching these tapes, that's one thing. But if you're not prepared to immerse yourself into it and really think of it almost as a religion, and the reason for that is because in this practice your life depends on it, and if you don't take it that serious, somebody will get hurt, and it's not worth it for that, for fun.
Have you tried using specific moves of Aikido in combat?
Yes, I have in fact. A number of the things that you see on these tapes, like escaping a choke with a third control technique, I've done it. Entering throw, I've done it. And a lot of these techniques I've done in fights that I lost. I've done entering throws in fights that I lost, but I got the entering throw off. I've had over 50 fights in Japan alone. I mean, I've been fighting all my life, and if you actually had to count how many professional fights I've had, that's including going into people's dojos and picking fights, it's a lot more than 50. If I counted on my hands the number of fighters that I have worked with who have gone on to become champion of this and champion of that, these are guys who have never been able to tap me in a dojo, and I've tapped them hundreds of times, thousands of times. And a lot of fighters try to compete with that by saying, let's say they embellish their records or their careers or what they've done. And I hear it from guys that I've trained and taught, and I get no acknowledgement of being the guy who trained them or taught them or even helped them. And a lot of guys are turning around and trying to pretend like you know, they're my teacher. I'm old. There are guys who have held a lot more titles than me. I've been doing this a lot more years than they have. So what I say with a great deal of experience. I was actually the first ultimate fighter to ever fight Royce Gracie, because I fought him in his dojo before the UFC ever existed. I'd been in Los Angeles for a while, and I needed money, and I had just heard about them. A friend of mine had told me about them, and I called him up and I asked him, is it true? And he said, yeah. And a story I like to tell is aside from the fact that none of us in professional fighting would have jobs if it wasn't for Jorge and Gracie, but I called him up and I bet. He said, you can bet if you want. And so I said, I'll bet. I said, I bet you $600. And he said, okay. And it was slated to be about 2 weeks later. And then about the day before the fight, he called me up and he said, let's forget the bet. So in my head, I'm thinking, oh, the guy must be afraid. But I get to the fight and we fight in the dojo and I lose. And then after the fight, he said, well, look at it this way. He says, you won $600. And I asked him, I said, how come you canceled that bet? And he said, $500 is a bet. He said, $1,000 is a bet, but $600 is rent. And so I could kind of tell he'd been there at some point. He'd been out on his luck, and I appreciated that. And not to mention, I appreciated the fact that we all had good jobs for a long time because of UFC and everything he did. Originally, before I fought Royce Gracie in his dojo, I moved to Los Angeles to answer a challenge that Steven Seagal made in Black Belt magazine. He said that anybody who wanted to fight him could go to his dojo and challenge him and be prepared to fight to the death. So I went with a written challenge, and I went every day, morning and night, even through the Los Angeles riots, and I waited, and he never came. But, you know, that's the kind of crazy things you do when you're a kid. In my view, all styles amount to the same thing. I think all styles, if you go to Southeast Asia, to Burma, you go to Thailand, all the old masters are practicing some soft form, usually a two-sword form or a spear form. Looks very much like Tai Chi. Tai Chi is the Chinese version of Aikido, and they all have the same ending form. Varies, but it's basically the same in the end. Aikido in any sport is based on your mastery of it, and that's all it is.